YouTube, a glorious social media platform and a place for people to say pretty much whatever they like, whatever their opinions are. They don't particularly have to be fact-checked and it's largely uncensored. Now the same thing can be said for all of the YouTube watch guys. Now the watch YouTubers can be held partly responsible for a lot of the hyped prices that we've seen for Rolex and other brands. Watch YouTubers in particular have been speaking about how they're seeing Rolex prices fall, but not particularly the higher end Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe and Mille models. So is that really true? I'm Watch Investor Vinny from Beat the Waitlist Watches. Go check out our website, beatthewaitlist-watches.com. A few weeks ago I did a video on the falling prices of particular steel and gold Rolex pieces. Now, as I've said, over the last few weeks I've seen quite a few dealers come out on YouTube and say they're not seeing that much of a fall in prices for Mille and some of the higher end Patek Philippe and AP models. Part of the reason that they're giving for that is actually that because those pieces are significantly higher priced and more expensive by nature than sub 20k Rolex models, they're saying that they actually attract a different type of customer, clientele that is more middle class. Their argument has been that the fact that the actual demographic of the customer that is attracted by a Mille is different, the fact that they are richer and potentially less hurt by the economic downturn that we're seeing at the moment. That hasn't led to a scenario, which is what's happened with Rolex, where clients are panic selling. The guys who own Mille, the guys who own higher end APs and Pateks don't need to sell because they don't particularly need the money and aren't really bothered too much about losing and can sit it out and can wait the long term for the prices to come back up. So I wanted to see really whether that was true. Let's get into it and start with Audemars Piguet. If we have a look then at the Royal Oak 15500 ST Blue, which is the new release, we can see that back in February they climbed to an all-time high of 92,000 and since then it's fallen quite dramatically in price to a position of £65,000. Now I want to clarify that all of this data that we have collected comes from three different sources. One, our very own watch dealer closed groups that we're a part of here at Beat the Waitlist. Also, we look at watchanalytics.io. That's a great website which plots all of the data for actual completed listings online that have sold, as well as Chrono24. Combining all of that data together and looking at averages, we've been able to plot the movement in prices since the fall began. For the Chrono Panda Royal Oak, the 26331 ST, that was sitting at 85,000 in February, and now in July also sits at 65k, similarly to the Royal Oak with plain blue dial that hasn't fallen quite as much at 24%. For a more higher end piece, I also looked at the Royal Oak Openwork Double Balance, and that was in February at £201,000. Here in July, we are seeing those selling at around 180,000, so that's only a 10% decrease for them. So an overall average of those three pieces suggests that AP has experienced a decline of around 21% on average. Patek Philippe then, the kings of the hype with the Nautiluses and Aquanauts, and obviously the Nautilus was discontinued, the 5711 was discontinued a few months ago, which led to that absolutely insane increase in value from 80,000 I think it was sitting at, to February where we saw the 5711 Blue actually skyrocket to £187,000, which was colossal for just a stainless steel sports watch with a very simple date function. So let's see how that did. Through March, it 2k declined to 175,000, and now in July we are seeing those selling on the secondary market for 140k. So that represents a 25% decrease. Next up, the Nautilus 5990 chronograph in steel also reached an all-time high in February of around £250,000, £250,000, and through to March started to decline to 246, and now in July that is a watch which is sitting at an absolutely dismal £160,000, which if you'd have bought that watch back in February, my condolences. Obviously, I think that piece will be weighing very heavily on your wrist right now. Wow, yikes, what a tremendous hit that has seen. £90,000 loss. For the Aquanaut, this is another one which went absolutely crazy at the turn of the year, skyrocketed all the way up to £86,000 on the secondary market. A date and time only watch on, which is stainless steel on a rubber strap. Crazy prices, 85,000 and now 64k in July, which represents a 25% decrease. So overall, for those three pieces that we've analysed there, it suggests an average decrease for Patek Philippe of 29%. So that's slightly more than the APs that we analysed there. 21% on average fall for Audemars Piguet, 29% fall on average for Patek Philippe. Does that mean that they're not falling quite as badly as Rolex? No, they're falling worse than Rolex. So that's what the data is suggesting to me, that really those dealers that are banning across YouTube saying that those particular brands haven't performed quite as badly, well, the data suggests otherwise there. Now this is the brand that I'm really interested in, Richard Mille. Richard Mille for me are a brand which are lovely watches, very unique by design with the tonneau case. The watch brand really with not that much history, and I would say not that much innovation either. Though we have seen only just this week that they released the thinnest watch in the world, which is a collaboration with Ferrari, so they're trying to jump on that bandwagon there of actually having some credibility and innovation in the industry. But for me, it's a brand that is 100% hype. You know, even in terms of their movements, they're not particularly that highly finished. For me, if anything was going to happen to the market, if ever the bubble was going to burst, it was going to start with Richard Mille. One key variable in all of this though is, if we're weighing up Rolex and how they might have fallen in prices against Richard Mille and their relationship to the supply and demand curve, when we look at Rolex, they pump out 1 million pieces every year. For Richard Mille, that figure is in the low thousands. So in terms of supply and demand, obviously it's a lot easier for you to go out and pick up a Rolex than it would be a Richard Mille. So how does that come into play? Let's look at the RM010 then in rose gold. In February, that piece was sitting at 136,500 on the secondary market. Now those are selling in July for 131,000. Not that much of a decrease of barely 4%. For the RM005 in white gold, that was sitting in February at 106,000. It hasn't really fallen that much through March and April, and now in July it's tipped under the £100,000 mark and sits at 95k, which represents a 10% fall. The more desirable RM030 in rose gold, which sits at £170,000 in February, it didn't really take much of a fall. Surprisingly, through March and April it grew in value, and in July it's a piece which sits at £185,000, guys. So that actually represents a growth in value since February, which defies the overall market conditions of prices falling. So the average decrease for those three Richard Mille pieces there that we've analysed is a mere 2%. So there we go. For AP, Patek, it seems that prices have fallen probably more on average than Rolex have. However, Richard Mille, the real surprise for me, as I said, I always thought that if the bubble was to ever burst as such, Richard Mille would go first because they were the first sort of big hype brand. They haven't been around that long, there isn't much of a history there, and the value of that brand and the pieces and their collection are based on their sporting collaborations and the celebrities that wear them. Perhaps some of those guys on YouTube saying that Richard Mille haven't experienced a decrease in value because they attract a different type of clientele, a clientele that aren't necessarily panic selling in the way that Rolex owners currently are at the moment. That's why they haven't fallen, because there hasn't been an excess supply on the market of Richard Mille. Bear in mind, of course, there is significantly less and fewer of those around anyway. So what does this say? Actually, it supports the argument that I made in the very first video on this channel, that the panic sellers, the guys who are panicking at the moment and flooding the market with their Rolex pieces, are the ones that are, in theory, driving the prices down. Anyway, thanks very much for joining me on this video. I've been Watch Investor Vinny. Like I said, go check out beatthewaitlist-watches.com, and I'll see you next week in the next one.